TTB Music Podcast.
Oh, welcome. Good morning, good evening, wherever.
And good night.
Yeah. First of all, apologies. It's been a while.
What are you apologising for now?
Well,
we apologised last time because I reviewed a different album.
we reviewed different records last time, yeah.
Okay.
Some people thought that was an improvement.
Yeah.
As reviewing different records.
True.
This time it's because we're a bit late in doing this, because we're usually quite good at doing this roughly once a month, but it's probably been about 6 weeks since we last
Is it that long?
did one. Which we are going to make up for, listeners, by cramming another one in this month. so the quality of those reviews will probably be really good.
Cool.
However, it does mean
Forthcoming.
it means this week we have had a reasonable amount of time to look over and
Have we?
listen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Surely on your travels.
Yes, we have.
So, Pet Shop Boys, of course. Super. We shall find out shortly if it is or not. Yeasayer, Amen and Goodbye. Deftones, Gore. Bob Mould, Patch the Sky. Parquet, Courts, Human Performance. And the last Shadow Puppets, Everything You've Come to Expect.
Yeah.
So we shall start, of course, with Pete, and of course with Pet Shop Boys, and their 13th album.
Uh-huh.
And the second in the trilogy. And we did do the last one as well,
We
didn't
did
we?
do Electric, and this is the second album in a proposed trilogy with producer Stuart Price. Here we go. Right, okay. I remember the last time I reviewed a Pet Shop Boys album, I went into automatic nitpicking mode.
Yes, you did. You did, in fact, if anything, I possibly seemed, on the review, if you listened to the review,
Yeah.
I came out seemingly liking it slightly more than you did,
Yeah,
which
no,
is quite surprising.
the album itself was absolutely bloody perfect. So I don't know where I'm coming from. So I'm going to approach this review slightly differently. I'm going to start with the outset saying, yeah, I really like this album. This is a superb pop record. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Now the nitpicking.
You said superb pop record.
Superb. Do you see what I did there? Superb. Yeah. Now this is I feel this is very much a return to format. After Electric, which
I like
of course,
it. Return to format, very good.
Return to format.
Oh, he's on form tonight, people.
He's on form. After the return to form of Electric, which was very much a sort of banging lasers and dance tunes album. This feels more like the traditional Pet Shop Boys album in that you've got 12 tracks, you have pop tunes, you have classic Neil doing geopolitical or history nonsense, and then you have some banging tunes in there as well.
Whoop, whoop.
So I feel this is very much a return to format. In terms of its immediate impact, I will be honest at this point, did not like this album as much as the previous one. However,
Okay.
there's some very good stuff in here which comes out on repeated listen, which I actually very much enjoyed. I'll be honest with you again, another nitpick. Not the biggest fan of the opening single.
No, although once you've heard it 75 billion times, it does kind of
It does
dig
start to
in.
rub off on you. Yeah, exactly. But I have to say, whereas the previous album, whilst being very much recorded now with a nod to the 80s with the cowbells and whatnot, this one has very much a nod to the 90s, which I think is brave territory for the Pet Shop Boys, if you know the history of the band. Not the best decade for them. Had they released tracks of this nature during that decade, I've no doubt they'd have been much more popular. However, they're doing it now, so hey, let's move on. I found this album is a grower.
Okay.
Very much a grower. And apart from the single, which is okay, I would pull out... I'm only going to pull out 2 tracks. I could pull out 10 tracks, but for the sake of this review and for the sake of brevity, I'll pull out 2 tracks, and I will pull out The Dictator Decides.
Yes.
For some of that aforementioned Neil-based geopolitical nonsense.
And him doing his best Leonard Cohen impersonation.
Exactly. And I will also pull out Inner Sanctum.
Okay. Which is one of the fun dancey pop
The fun,
tunes.
dancey pop, barely any lyrics, mostly instrumental, banging tunes and lasers.
You'd be unsurprised to find out I quite like that one.
Yeah, I can imagine. A little nod back to Electric, I thought, with that track in particular as well, which of course was an awesome album. So I'd give this 9 out of 10.
Wow. Yeah. So since we started doing this podcast, given that one of the things that we said at the start was the fact that I didn't like the Pet Shop Boys, we've reviewed quite a few Pet Shop Boys records now, seemingly, and I've been quite kind to all of them. And seriously, I have to say, on the first listen to this album, part of me was feeling quite good, because I was thinking, good, I can turn up to the podcast and give it a good kicking.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was a bit crap.
Yep. Yep.
But I will, I have to confess, having sadly, sorry, listeners, so I readers there, sorry, listeners, it is a grower, and it does seem a clear attempt on part of the band to kind of harness and mine both their own disco past, as you said, kind of add that kind of house element into it as well, particularly, I think.
Very much the 90s past as well.
Yeah. So it definitely does seem like it's a more Chris-driven record overall, sound-wise. Actually, you've probably picked out the best track on the album. I think The Dictator Decides is by far the best thing on it. Although, bizarrely, it's the thing that fits in least with the rest of the album.
True.
As I say, it is very much like a Leonard Cohen, I'm Your Man kind of period. Leonard Cohen. But elsewhere on the album, there is some kind of fun stuff. You've got 20-something and Sad Robot World, both of which lean very heavily on Kraftwerk. The former sounding a bit like a marriage between Sparks and a-ha.
Yeah.
You have Blue Monday cropping up in Pazzo, which I found quite amusing. And as you say, you've got things like Inner Sanctum, Burn, Happiness, which are all kind of just fun pop tunes, really.
Yeah.
It's very much a dance floor album, very, very much aimed at people getting up and boogieing.
Very much.
And it's bright up tempo, and overall, I have to admit, I actually quite liked it.
I did wonder, because I know you liked the last one.
Yeah, I did quite like the last
But I
one.
felt this one was returning more to, as I said at the start, more to format, in terms of number of tracks and stuff. I have to say, I'm finding the slow one on side 2, which they seem to do every time. Perhaps brings the tempo back down, and in this case it was Sad Robot World, which is fine. 20-something was amusing, because obviously all that talk of waiting for ideas to trend and very much fed into the zeitgeist of one particular city I can think of. But that said, there's a lot on here to get your teeth into, and I think repeated listening does reward once again. Well done.
Very good.
Yeah.
So we move on. We move on to the fourth album by Yeasayer, Amen and Goodbye. Regular listeners to the podcast, there are a couple, may remember we have reviewed the last 2 albums. The second album, which was Odd Blood, was a big favourite of both yours and mine. It was one of those classic kind of albums that kind of blended psychedelic weirdness with 80s pop sensibilities and just actually some general weirdness, but produced an album full of actually engaging and interesting tracks. It's fair to say we were less than enamoured with the follow-up record, Fragrant World, which seemed to deliberately avoid doing anything
we liked.
Yeah. Although to be fair to them, the thing that had in common with both the 2 albums previous to that was each album had been remarkably different from the previous one, and it's that classic thing that we're always criticising bands for not changing, and then occasionally when they do change, we're going, no, I'm not sure about that. We're allowed to be fickle. So this one changes again. There's a definite change again. Relies less on the kind of synth soundscapes that the 2 previous albums have. But the good news, for me at least, is that the pop sensibilities are definitely back. It doesn't take long for my positive memories of Odd Blood come rushing back with this record. And indeed, I think they've succeeded in taking the best bits of their first 3 albums and blending it into possibly what may be, I think, their best album to date. Yeah, kicks off with a bit of kind of Pink Floyd, Beach Boys kind of dreaminess kind of thing, verging on Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
Just saying it, put that there. Which segs beautifully into I Am Chemistry, which is a great pop song, which kind of opens up various layers of kind of guitar into synth, and then the first appearance of several of Susie Roach of the Roaches, which adds a female voice to the whole thing, which I think lifts this album up that extra step. On this particular track, it sounds like it's a group of children singing, frankly.
Yeah.
It's her. But she also appears in, I'm trying to think what else it is, in Dead Sea Scrolls and a couple of other things. And this album just worked for me on every level. The songs are strong, they're fun, they're well written, well produced. You can hum them. You've got elements of Crosby, Stills and Nash, the Beatles on kind of Prophecy Gun and stuff like that. You've got a theremin playing on the song Uma. Can't be a good bit of theremin. That's what I say. Silly Me, which is just a perfectly silly throwaway pop song, and there's a great track at the end of the album called Cold Night, which is a kind of tale of suicide, which has the great line, "Is there something I could have told you to carry you through the cold night?" which I think is just a great lyric. And yeah, overall I think this album is, like I said, possibly their best album, and very good.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you to a point. I still think Yeasayer, I still think Odd Blood is my preferred album.
Yeah,
if I'm honest. I found this one a little bit slower in places, and what I really liked about Yeasayer is what they did on that second album. And hey, on this occasion, I don't want the band to change. I want them to do the same thing. Having said that, this is a in my mind it has more to offer in terms of their musical style. It has more to offer a listener on repeated listen once again. And again, this was an album that I listened to the first time, and I was just like,
yeah.
Because memory of the previous album,
Yeah, Fragrant World.
yeah, which I remember being completely underwhelmed by. But actually, yes, this is far better. So maybe it's their best album. It's not my favourite album, but maybe it is their best album. Maybe you're right there. And again, really liked when they did reference back to the Odd Blood period as well.
Yeah.
Particularly later on, was it Child Prodigy?
Oh, they kind of
One particular track where it goes very Odd Blood, and I was just like, yeah, this is what I'm liking, And of course, that builds on some of the other tracks you mentioned in terms of Silly Me, yes, Dead Sea Scrolls, obviously. But yeah, I found the second half of the album I actually enjoyed a lot more.
Ah,
so
this is one of your famous second half of the album.
Yeah, exactly. So I always prefer the second half to the first half. So it's one of those.
Interestingly, I have a comment about the second half of one of the albums in the podcast. Yes.
yeah. As opposed to the Pet Shop Boys album, I prefer the first half. Here we go. Now, I don't know if the title's a giveaway. I hope this is not their last album.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
No, but it has very much a sign off. But that said, hope to hear more from them, and I still kind of really want them to be big. I really want them to...
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It'd be nice.
Yeah, it'd be nice. This band deserves success. And they've gone through the run of productions and what they're going to do. So yeah, I really hope that they are successful. Maybe the fifth album.
Indeed. Right, now turn the volume up a tad.
Oh gosh, yes.
For the 8th studio album from Californian heavy metal band. It's classed you can't say heavy metal band because they are classed as kind of heavy metal, but they came up in that whole new wave thing. But also they had, it is famously they were once described, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, as what Radiohead would sound like if they became a metal band, which I think is actually which I actually think is a better description of the Deftones sound. Anyway, like I said, 8th album, Gore.
Yeah.
Gore. Pete?
Gore. Again, repeated viewing or listening is necessary. This album, of the 6 that we've selected this evening, was the one I probably struggled most with initially. That said, there is a real Pearl Jam to this.
Well, yeah, there's that. There is. I mean, the whole thing. Like I said, they came up with bands like Korn and that whole kind of new metal thing.
Yeah,
but,
it's the new metal thing.
But there's as you say, there is that
but
kind
it actually goes further back than that.
Yeah, there is that Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Smashing Pumpkins vibe about various bits of it as well. Yeah,
absolutely. So to describe them as a metal band is way off. But to describe them as some sort of grunge act is probably not accurate either. This is it's an interesting album. And I mean, particular highlights, if we're going to pick them out, I like Prayers and Triangles, which is the first track.
The opener, yeah.
The opening track, it sort of sets the scene. Then it gets louder. Then it gets much louder. Acid Hologram, really cool. And further on, Hearts, Wires and Petura Infamante.
Yeah, can you give us titles that we can pronounce?
Yes, please. Thank you. Really good. So, and also quite short.
Actually, which is common. Bizarrely, I think it's actually the longest album on the list that we reviewed.
Feels quite short.
Yeah.
Yeah. So passes through the time quite nicely. So as I say, probably not my favourite album of the podcast. But probably one of the better rock albums that we've heard for a while. Yeah,
I mean, I think this, to use your old favourite too, I think this is a classic case of a solid album.
I try not to say that.
Really, it's one of those albums that's actually quite enjoyable to listen to whilst you're listening to it, without it necessarily being something you feel you're going to be overly drawn back to.
No.
That said, as you rightly pointed out, there are some really nice moments in the album. Starts off quite strong. Some nice kind of touches of kind of light and dark on the kind of turning up the volume and turning down the volume kind of thing that worked very well. And towards the end of the album, the second last track, Phantom Bride, which features the guitarist from Alice in Chains, actually, I think is possibly the most commercial track on the album. It's very, dare say, poppy, but it is actually quite a poppy song in the context of this record. It's also a very good track, and it's one that I think would not surprise me when you kind of start checking out the kind of stats on Spotify and Apple and stuff like that of most played tracks. It wouldn't surprise me if that turns out to be the track that is played most of this particular record. Yeah. But I agree with you. I think it's they are quite an interesting band. And I think this album shows why they've had the staying power that they've had, because they have been not afraid to kind of experiment and within the kind of genre, and not be kind of confined by the new or indeed old metal label. In fact, for one to check out, previously they did a really good song which I think is called Pink Cell Phone, which featured Annie Hardy of Giant Drag about 5-6 years ago, which is well worth checking out. Really good track.
Yeah.
So, moving on from the Deftones, although not necessarily turning the volume down, we move on to the latest album from Bob Mould. For those who know their music, he started off in Husker Du and then moved on to a band called Sugar. I think it's fair to say that he has a distinct sound, and that distinct sound was a sound that was pretty much created in the kind of Husker Du days, of that kind of pseudo-lo-fi indie sound. In fact, probably you could argue that's been a template, if in a polished form, for virtually every kind of pop-punk band that we've heard over the last 20 years, from Green Day to 5 Seconds of Summer and on some. See Hands Are Tied on this track, for on this album for proof of that. And also there are a band who clearly influenced bands like, or he is someone that's clearly influenced bands like Nirvana and the Foo Fighters, Pearl Jam and various other people as well. Basically, you know what you're getting with Bob Mould, particularly when he's in angry mode. It's loud guitars, and he's got a really good three-piece playing on this album. So they are a power trio, as the thing goes. And they're a power trio that make a lot of noise. The thing that makes Bob Mould, for me, stand out from other people that are just making a lot of noise is, whilst he makes a lot of noise, he still has good pop sensibilities.
Absolutely.
As well. So whatever he's doing, there's usually really good pop tunes in there, even if he is playing them very, very loud. On this album, it's quite a dark record, because his mum had just died when he started writing this album, and I think he had problems in the relationship. So I think the line, I think it's in the final track, Monuments, pretty much sums up the overall tone, which is, I try to be happy every day, but my black heart, it burns, which kind of sums up the overall mood, lyrically, at least, of the album. But saying that, you've got that dark lyrics, and yet they're surrounded by melody. So you've got songs like Pray for Rain, which is quite cheery, End of Things, equally.
Yeah.
That are kind of very upbeat, kind of, thinking, da, 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 kind of things, and yet it's all kind of grimness going on behind. So it's one of those albums that if you like Bob Mould, you're going to like this album, because it's pretty much Bob Mould doing what Bob Mould does. If you don't know Bob Mould or have never heard of Bob Mould, it's a reasonable album to get acquainted with him with, in my opinion.
I'd agree with that latter statement. Having not known Bob Mould, a solo career, at least. I completely agree with that. And the other thing you said there about it being actually a pop album appealed to me as well, because there is a real pop sensibility to every track on this album. Despite the tone, despite the lyrics, it's just constructed in such a way that it has that appeal as a pop singer or a pop singer-songwriter, and yet isn't a pop album, clearly.
No.
Yeah. So that's good. I like that. Oh no, I can see. Pray for Rain, in particular. I you'd probably slap me afterwards for saying this, but. I got a real sense of Noel Gallagher at one point in the middle of this album somewhere.
Wouldn't surprise me. Well, sure, Noel Gallagher's.
And I'm sure
Noel Gallagher knows who Bob is.
Oh, absolutely. But it was that sort of upbeat, quite maudlin but yet upbeat at the same time sound that he's sort of running with these days. It really sort of smacked me at that as well. No, this was. I'm going to use it. This was a solid album.
Actually, I did make a note of another lyric that I really liked, actually. It's in The End of Things, which I really like this bit. It says, I didn't want to play the song that gave people so much hope. I turned my back and turned away. Here's the rope that made me choke.
Yes.
Another one of the cheery moments on the
one of those cheery pop lyrics.
Yeah. But it's got that. But also it's like on Daddy's Favourite. There's a riff in Daddy's Favourite that, frankly, Kiss would be proud of.
Mm.
It's kind of it's the kind of big rock. There's a big rock riff in there. It's just it's. But yeah, staying with indie, I suppose, but certainly turning the volume down a tad. We move on to the fifth album from Parquet Courts, Human Performance, a band that previous albums have been quite highly rated critically, although it's the first one that we have reviewed.
Really?
Although this one, apparently, I did read this is them going more pop than their previous output.
Right, okay. This album, for me, was of the rock albums that we've reviewed.
Yes.
This month. This was probably the most enjoyable for me. It very much. I don't think we've had a classic indie album for quite a while. This is getting close.
Sweet.
This is really. Really good album in terms of that sort of indie sensibility. It has that, at times it has that lo-fi feel, at times it has that very much Americana feel. For me, I was what I liked about this is I was transported to another place listening to this album.
Yeah,
and it's not necessarily a place I go to musically, but for me, I sat and listened to this album a few times, and I found that on every listen I was repeatedly rewarded with something new, which is great. So that's why I like this particular record. And again, I'm going to go first half or second half. I know it's throughout. There's some good pop tunes in here that aren't necessarily pop, and there were some callbacks to sort of classic 70s music as well, which I found really enjoyable. There was one track in particular I was convinced Bowie was there. Well, hey, maybe he was. So, you know,
we see Bowie everywhere.
Yeah, we see Bowie everywhere now, and that was very enjoyable. And it's not even the track called Berlin; it's the one before. So
Berlin Got Blurry is quite a funny track. That's a track about being racking up somewhere as a kind of tourist and not knowing anything and trying to kind of make head or tail of your new surroundings, which is quite funny.
Which is almost quite Bowie-esque, I guess. Really enjoyable record, this one. What did you think?
It's a grower.
It's a grower. Yeah.
It's definitely a grower. And I agree with much of what you said. It is another good pop record, actually. As you say, there's elements of the kind of band you might expect to be referenced. So, Talking Heads, particularly One Man, One City, Two Dead Cops have a very Talking Heads vibe to them. You've got some Pixies, touch of R.E.M., the jarringness of kind of I Was Just Here and Paraphrased reminded me of a band called Swimming Pool Cues, and particularly their debut album. But then you've just got straight out joy in songs like Dust, which is, it's got a great kind of riff and then going, sweet. Sweet. Or One Man, No City, where you've got congas. Not enough congas on albums, so that's what I say.
Need more congas.
Although saying that, I plan to do the new Santana album next podcast, so I would be very surprised if not some congas on the Santana album. And yeah, it's a really, really good indie record. Interesting lyrically. You got Two Dead Cops, which is about two police officers who were killed in New York in 2014, and kind of comparing how that was dealt with compared to obviously the shootings of several black people by the police, and so it's kind of it's an interesting kind of vibe to the whole record. But yeah, overall it's a very good record, which I think will get better with even more listens.
I think so.
The same, for me at least, cannot be said for our final album. The second album from Les Shadow Puppets. 8 years since the last one, I think. Reading.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, now I feel old.
So it's Miles Kane and Alex... God, what's his name?
Mills? No.
Yeah, Miles Kane and Alex...
Turner.
God, yeah.
Yeah, we really are getting old.
I know. Yeah, so the first album was one that was heavily bathed, I think, say in the 60s, and the 60s, and it had definitely had kind of Scott Walker and some Bowie influences in it. We clearly haven't lost the Scott Walker and Bowie influences on this album. They're still there. We have lots of strings on this album to enhance the vibiness, shall we say. Yeah. And in addition to that, I should say on the Bowie front as well, the actual song element of surprise nods quite strongly to Let's Dance in its rhythm arrangement. But in addition to that, we also have some Rundgren,
Ping,
and some Style Council, amongst other things. On Dracula Teeth, particularly, that's just, it really, really sounds like the Style Council. And the title track itself is the one that certainly has elements of Todd to it. And for a change, it's not just me saying that, because when interviewed about things they were listening to when this album was in preparation, Alex Turner did say, and I quote, "There were some Todd Rundgren songs, and a Ned Donaghy album, and Hard Candy, as well as the Style Council." So, whilst I was sitting there pulling out those things when I was listening to it, I kind of realised it wasn't just me, for a change, just kind of going, "Oh, there's Scott hearing Todd everywhere."
That's where they were going.
It actually was. And also there's a big helping of T-Rex and stuff like that. And it's one of these albums that the overall vibe of it's very kind of relaxed in a kind of, pipe and slippers, feet up kind of way. And as such, I think it's kind of perched on a fence between self-indulgence and carefree fun enjoyment. The reason for me it satisfies neither of those in the end is because I think, pattern probably aside, I think the second half of the album just isn't very good. First half of the album I think is quite strong, quite good. Second half of the album is a bit kind of meh. And all 3 times I listened to this album I was bored and distracted by the time I got to the end of the album.
That's a fair comment. My problem with The Last Shadow Puppets is I feel exactly the same way about the first album, listening to it many years later. Obviously that was released in a wave of love for all things Arctic Monkeys.
Indeed, yes.
And interesting side project. And very much influenced, I think, the reception that got at the time. Whereas this, it doesn't quite carry through with the substance. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, exactly what I mean.
It doesn't quite... I want to like this record because, I mean, despite what I've just said about the first one, I didn't much mind it. But yeah, this one just... It's not... I can't see myself coming back to this record now that we have reviewed it, which is such a shame, because there was a time, of course, when I thought Alex Turner and the Arctic Monkeys were the next Beatles, But here we are 10 years later, and yeah, that dream has died. So
Wings!
Yes, so we're into Wings. And yeah, it is verging on the self-indulgent. There's even a track towards the end where they do actually reference themselves, lyrically speaking.
There is, yes. Although I actually thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, it was one of those classic Alex Turner sort of nods, but yeah, anyway, that side. It does start well. It has moved more towards 70s, 80s rather than the classic sort of 60s model of the first record. All those elements you've listed are still there. If you liked the first album,
yes,
then you'll probably like this. But I liked the first album
I think
back in the day, but time has passed and maybe I don't listen to it so much. So actually this one fell a bit flat.
Alright, well that's the album's over with, but I suppose we should at least say a word for yet another death.
Yeah,
and the death of Prince.
It's bloody hell. For me, and you may feel differently. Prince for me came at a time in my own appreciation of music, where obviously the hits were there, and actually Prince meant more to me than when you sort of think about commercial comparisons at the time. You think about Madonna and you think about Michael Jackson. Prince to me continued to mean more.
Yes,
although perhaps the success of the other two was perhaps more obvious, if that makes sense.
Well, they did have. They were
out there.
They were more consistent in their hit making, although clearly. Well, actually, I was about to say less varied. That's probably being slightly unkind to both of them, but they were.
You can still put a Prince record on now. I'm thinking particularly from the Purple Rain '99 period.
Yeah,
and it still raises the hairs on the back of the head. For me, this was not. I mean, this was a complete shock. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, indeed.
An absolute shock, and I thought, what a flipping shame. It for me, it's not had the impact of Bowie.
No, ditto.
And but at the same time, if we were going to do a little tribute to the various artists that have sadly passed on this year
already,
it's probably longer than all the podcasts that we've recorded. Yeah. How about yourself? How are you feeling?
Yeah, shame. Again, it's a shame to lose anybody that is as genuinely,
Absolutely.
as talented and inventive as an artist as Prince was. Which is not to say that he didn't record some shite, because he recorded lots of shite, in my opinion. However, it made me think back to, again, I'm not sure the first time I actually heard him, but the first thing that sticks in my head would have been listening to an edition of Round Table on Radio 1, which is where they used to review singles. Something that's been revived on Six Music with Steve the Mac. I noticed the other week, which I think when Mike Reed was doing it was called Singled Out for a while.
Mike Reed.
But anyway, they were, and this might have been a Mike Reed period one. I'm not sure, but they were reviewing the singles, and it was either Little Red Corvette or 1999. I can't remember for the life of me at the moment which one it was. But I remembered all the members of the panel really just raving about it, and in particular Noddy Holder, Slade, who said he'd seen him live and had just been blown away. Yeah. And I must I'd kind of listened to the bit of the track they played, and I kind of thought, yeah, that's a bit rubbish to me, with my heavy metal hat on, not really kind of thing. And so I didn't really think about it, and then bizarrely, in between that, so that would have been about 82, I guess. So between that and 84, which was when Purple Rain came out, I suppose I'd heard a couple of tracks off the Controversy album. Do Me Baby and Jack You Off, and if people are aware of the song Jack You Off, it is pretty much as it sounds. And clearly my puerile teenager self thought that was hysterically funny. And so I kind of thought, maybe it's all right. And then, of course, Purple Rain came out, and then suddenly you had floods of heavy metal people kind of going, oh, well, he plays guitar, all right? Yeah, that's fine, it seems to be all right.
Yeah.
Although, bizarrely, on that other album, then and still to this day, even now, When Doves Cry is still my favourite track on the album. It's my favourite track when it came out. It's the track that doesn't have any guitars in it. Oh, no, actually, there is a guitar at the start, isn't there?
Yes.
Which is usually cut off anytime they play it on the radio. And from then on, I suppose I did become a fan of sorts, but a fan like I said was loved, hated, and indifferent to various bits of Prince. He was very very much an artist who, for me, didn't release many great albums. There was always great stuff on the albums. But there was always, at least for my musical taste, dross on the albums as well.
Yeah. I think that's the point. I think he could play. You could play one of his tracks at an indie disco. You could play one of his tracks at an 80s night. Clearly.
Clear.
You could play one of his tracks now.
Yeah.
He spanned that sort of period from the late 70s funk right through to R&B. I mean, I remember Most Beautiful Girl in the World. It's a classic tune. Terrible period for him.
Terrible album. Yeah.
Terrible album. Terrible period, full stop. But, it's a classic tune. And then, of course, there was all the work that he did with so many other artists. I mean, we reviewed the... what were they called? The three...
Yes. I know you mean. I can't think of his name.
Hard-Eyed Girl or something.
Yeah.
And apologies that I've got that blatantly wrong, listener. We reviewed that album, and that album was awesome. And we only did that a couple of years ago. But there was all the stuff that he wrote for other people. I mean, Nothing Compares to You stands out. But there was much, much more as well. Yeah,
I mean, it is, as you say, it is that kind of thing. And luckily, I got to see him live on when he did.
Girl. I don't know.
Well, when he did the 21 nights at the O2.
Yeah.
Lucky to see him live, and it was definitely one of those things when we're just thinking, there's a reason why some people say someone has it or the famous X Factor.
Yes,
because he was definitely one of those artists. He owned the stage, but the thing was, his swagger was matched with his musicianship, and that's why.
Yes,
and he was clearly someone that loved to play music. This was a man, let's not forget, who would get up on stage, play a 2.5 hour, 3 hour set, jump off stage, jump into a car, go down to a local club, have have a drink, have a bite to eat, and then get up on stage and jam for another 2.5 hours.
Exactly. Three-eyed girl.
Three-eyed girl.
Because obviously there's three of them.
Electrum.
I actually said that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it is. Yeah, it's sad, but you know, he's left us with a lot of good music. So
Quite a legacy. I remember. I mean, the final thought for me is. I think it's in the sleeve notes for Nine Inch Nails' "Pretty Hate Machine." Of all albums, Prince is cited as an influence, and I think it's that ethos of the man playing his instruments and playing them all to such a level of professionalism and musical genius that obviously Trent Reznor pulled out as well. That
Indeed,
was something that he wanted to emulate.
Yep.
I'll stop there.
And you know, last week, as a fun note, Prince would have been happy because sometimes it does snow in April.
Hey. Cool.
On that note, kiddies.
No. Can I open this now?
Yeah, you can open that now.
Can I open it now?
I'm stopping the podcast now.
You're stopping the podcast?
Yeah.
It doesn't make great radio, does it?
Yeah. Oh no, actually it's musically related, so I suppose I could leave it on.
It's a birthday present. 1971, Never a Dull Moment. Rock's Golden Year by David Hepworth. I shall look forward to that. Thank you so much.
Review next podcast. You've been listening to the CTTV Music Podcast.